There are things that happen behind closed doors that the human mind refuses to accept as possible. We tell ourselves that grief has limits, that love has boundaries, that even in the darkest moments of loss, something inside us knows when to let go. But what happens when that line disappears? What happens when a mother's love becomes something else entirely? When it transforms into something that cannot be named, cannot be understood, cannot be stopped? In a small apartment in Nizhny Novgorod, Russia, neighbors noticed something they couldn't quite name. A smell that came and went with the seasons. A woman who stopped answering questions about her child. Windows that stayed closed even in summer, even when the heat became unbearable. For 5 years, no one pushed hard enough to find out why, because the truth was living on the other side of that door. And it was worse than any of them could have imagined. This is the story of a mother who couldn't say goodbye, and a child who never got the chance to rest. It starts with silence. The kind of silence that fills hallways and stairwells. The kind that makes people look away when they pass a certain door. The kind that everyone pretends not to notice. And it ends with a question no one wants to answer. What does love become when it refuses to end? When it clings so tightly to what was that it destroys what remains? The answer is waiting in that apartment. In a small bedroom at the end of a narrow hallway. Under a blanket patterned with faded cartoon animals. And once you know it, you can never forget it. Her name was Svetlana Mikhailovna, 32 years old when it began. Quiet. Polite. The kind of woman who blended into the background of everyday life. She worked part-time at a local grocery store, stocking shelves in the early mornings before the crowds came. Her co-workers described her as unremarkable, friendly enough but distant. She never spoke much about her personal life, never joined them for cigarette breaks outside, never complained about the work or the pay. She simply showed up, did her job, and left. Svetlana lived alone with her son, Danil. He was 7 years old when people stopped seeing him. Small for his age, with pale skin and dark eyes that seemed too large for his face. Teachers at his school said he was a gentle child, nervous, hesitant to speak up in class. He rarely played with other kids during recess. He preferred to sit by himself near the fence, drawing in the dirt with sticks. Sometimes he would hum quietly to himself, little melodies no one recognized. When teachers asked him questions, he would answer in barely a whisper. They had to lean in close to hear him. One teacher remembered asking him once what he liked to do at home. Danil had looked down at his hands. "I stay with my mama," he said. "She doesn't like when I'm far away." The teacher thought it was sweet at the time. A shy boy close to his mother. Nothing unusual about that. Looking back, she wishes she had asked more questions. There was no father in the picture. Svetlana never mentioned him, and no one felt comfortable asking. In a place like this, people learned not to pry. Single mothers were common. Absent fathers even more so. Their apartment was on the 4th floor of a Soviet-era block. Gray concrete. Narrow hallways that smelled like boiled cabbage and cigarette smoke. Paint peeling from the walls. Light bulbs that flickered and went out for weeks before anyone replaced them. The kind of building where everyone heard everyone, but no one really knew anyone. Neighbors would see Svetlana and Danil coming and going. Always together, she held his hand tightly when they walked. Too tightly, some thought. Her fingers wrapped completely around his small wrist. He never pulled away. They moved in a rhythm that seemed rehearsed. Up the stairs, into the apartment, the door closing quickly behind them, the lock clicking into place. From the outside, it looked like survival. A single mother doing her best. Nothing more, nothing less. But inside that apartment, something else was growing. Something that had been there long before anyone noticed. Danil had been sick for months. A persistent cough that wouldn't go away. Pale lips. Bruises that appeared without explanation. Dark circles under his eyes that made him look older than 7. Svetlana took him to the clinic twice. The first time, she waited in line for over an hour before leaving abruptly. The second time, she made it into the waiting room, but left before Danil's name was called. She told neighbors he was fine. Just a cold. Kids get sick. It happens. He just needed rest. And then, one winter, Danil stopped going to school. At first, the teachers assumed he was home with the flu. It was January. Half the class was out sick. They sent a letter home asking Svetlana to confirm when he would return. She never responded. They sent another letter. Then a third. Still nothing. A social worker was assigned to follow up. She came to the door on a gray afternoon in February, knocked 3 times, waited. Svetlana answered with a smile. She looked tired, but not alarmed. She explained that Daniil was being homeschooled now, that the classroom environment had been too stressful for him, that he was doing better at home where it was quiet. The social worker asked to see him. Svetlana hesitated. Just for a moment. Then she said he was sleeping, that he hadn't been feeling well and needed rest. The social worker glanced past her into the dim apartment. She saw nothing alarming, no signs of abuse or neglect, just a small, cluttered living space like 1,000 others. She made a note in her file and left. No one came back. Weeks passed, then months. The neighbors stopped seeing the boy entirely, but they still saw Svetlana. She still went to work, still smiled when someone said hello in the stairwell, still carried plastic bags of groceries up the 4 flights of stairs, breathing heavily by the time she reached the top. And when someone finally asked, casually, where Daniil was, she would say the same thing every time. He's resting. He needs his rest. One neighbor, an older woman named Galina, asked if he was feeling better. Svetlana paused on the stairs, looked at her with an expression that was hard to read. He will be, she said. He just needs time. Galina nodded and didn't ask again. No one did, because asking felt uncomfortable, intrusive, and in a building where people barely spoke to each other, discomfort was reason enough to stay silent. So the question stopped, and Svetlana continued up the stairs. Alone now, always alone. The door would close behind her with a heavy sound. The lock would turn, and inside, in the growing darkness, she was never really alone at all. The smell started in late spring. At first it was faint. Something spoiled in someone's trash, the neighbors assumed. A dead rat in the walls, maybe. Old buildings like this had problems. Pipes leaked. Things rotted. It was part of living in a place like this. But by summer, it had grown stronger. It wasn't constant. Some days, the hallway on the 4th floor was fine. The air was stale but breathable. Other days, the air was thick and sour, like meat left out too long in the heat, like something organic breaking down slowly. People covered their noses when they walked past Svetlana's door. They quickened their pace. They complained to each other in whispers, but never directly to her. Eventually, someone complained to the building manager. His name was Sergei, 58 years old, heavy-set, permanently tired. He had managed the building for 15 years and had seen everything. Domestic fights, drug addicts, hoarders. Nothing surprised him anymore. He knocked on Svetlana's door on a Thursday afternoon. She answered quickly, as if she'd been waiting just behind the door. She looked thinner than he remembered. Her clothes hung loose. Her hair was pulled back in a greasy ponytail. But she smiled when she saw him. Sergei told her about the complaints, the smell. He kept his tone casual, non-accusatory. He'd learned that approach worked best. Svetlana apologized immediately. Said she'd had some food go bad in the fridge. Said she hadn't realized it had gotten so bad. Said she'd take care of it right away. Sergei asked if she needed help disposing of anything. She said no. Said she could handle it. He nodded, started to leave, then paused. "How's your boy doing?" he asked. Svetlana's smile didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "He's fine," she said. "Resting." Sergei waited for her to say more. She didn't. He left without pushing further. The smell faded for a few days. Then it returned, stronger this time. Svetlana stopped going to work as regularly. Her shifts became sporadic. Some weeks she showed up every day, other weeks not at all. Her manager tried calling her. She never answered. When she did come in, her co-workers noticed changes. She looked increasingly gaunt. Her hands shook when she lifted boxes. She moved slowly, as if every step required enormous effort. And she started talking to herself, not loudly, just whispers, soft murmurs under her breath that stopped whenever someone got too close. One co-worker, a young woman named Irina, asked if she was okay. Svetlana turned to her with that same distant smile. "I'm fine," she said. "Just tired. Just a lot on my mind." Irina didn't ask again. At home, the curtains stayed drawn. The windows remained shut, even when the temperature climbed above 30 degrees. The apartment became a sealed box, airless, dark. Neighbors would see a faint light glowing through the fabric late at night, but never movement. No shadows crossing in front of the lamp. No sound of footsteps or voices or television. Just that dim yellow glow. One woman who lived across the hall, a nurse named Oksana, swore she heard Svetlana talking in the early morning hours. Full conversations, back and forth. Two voices, she thought at first. But when she pressed her ear to the door, there was only one. Svetlana's. She was asking questions, pausing, then answering them herself in a slightly different tone, as if performing both sides of a dialogue. Oksana told her husband about it. He shrugged. Lonely people talk to themselves, he said. It's not a crime, so she said nothing. Another neighbor, an older man named Victor who lived 2 doors down, saw Svetlana carrying bags up the stairs one afternoon in late August. Groceries as usual. But this time something caught his eye. Among the plastic bags was a small blanket. A child's blanket, patterned with faded cartoon animals, bears and rabbits and bright yellow suns. He asked gently if Daniil was feeling better. Svetlana stopped on the landing. She turned to look at him. Her face was difficult to read. Not quite confusion. Not quite fear. Something in between. He's fine, she said slowly. He just needs to stay warm. It was August. The heat was suffocating. Victor said nothing more. He watched her continue up the stairs, the blanket dragging slightly from one of the bags. When she disappeared into her apartment, he stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door. Then he went back to his own life. By autumn, the building manager received another complaint, this time from a young couple who lived directly below Svetlana's apartment. They reported a dark stain spreading across their ceiling, a wet, brownish mark that had appeared gradually over the course of several weeks. It smelled like decay. Sergei went back to Svetlana's door, knocked harder this time, called her name. She didn't answer right away. He could hear her moving inside, slow, shuffling steps, something being dragged across the floor, a door closing. When she finally opened the door, she only cracked it a few inches. Her face was gaunt, her eyes bloodshot, her hair unwashed and matted. Sergei told her about the stain, said it might be a leak, said he needed to check the bathroom and kitchen. Svetlana shook her head. There's no leak, she said. Sergei insisted, said he'd need to send a maintenance worker if she didn't let him check. Building regulations. He had no choice. Svetlana stared at him for a long time. Please don't, she whispered. He asked why not. You'll disturb him, she said. Sergei felt something cold move through his chest. Your son? He asked carefully. She nodded. He needs quiet. He's resting. Sergei stood there unsure what to say. Part of him wanted to push, to demand entry. But another part of him, the part that had learned not to get involved in people's private lives, held him back. He told her he'd give her a week to fix whatever was causing the stain. After that, he'd have to come in. She said nothing, just closed the door. Sergei filed a report, but never followed up. Winter came. The cold dulled the smell, but it never fully disappeared. The air on the 4th floor carried a permanent sourness now. People avoided the hallway when they could. Svetlana stopped leaving the apartment almost entirely. Groceries were delivered now. She'd open the door just wide enough to take the bags and hand over crumpled bills. The delivery drivers never saw inside, just a dark gap and a pale hand reaching through. One of them, a teenager named Maxim, later told police he thought he heard a child's voice, faint, singing maybe, a soft, tuneless melody. When he asked Svetlana if her son was home, she stared at him through the crack in the door. He's always home, she said. Then she closed the door. Maxim mentioned it to his supervisor. His supervisor shrugged, said it wasn't their problem. So he delivered groceries the next week, and the week after that, and every time he heard that same faint sound, that wordless melody drifting from somewhere deep inside the apartment. He never asked about it again. By December, the neighbors had stopped talking about Svetlana entirely. She had become like the smell, like the stain on the ceiling, like the flickering light in the hallway. Just another broken thing in a broken building, something everyone noticed but no one fixed. And behind her door in the growing darkness, Svetlana sat beside a small bed. She smoothed the blanket, brushed hair that was no longer there, whispered words that no one answered. But in her mind, someone was listening. In her mind, her son was still there, and he would be there forever. It happened on a Tuesday in March, 5 years after Daniil stopped going to school, 5 years after anyone had seen him alive. A pipe burst in the apartment directly above Svetlana's. The resident, an elderly man who lived alone, didn't notice until water was pooling on his floor. By the time he called the building manager, it had already started seeping down through the ceiling. Water flooded into the walls, soaked the insulation, dripped down onto the 4th floor. The damage was severe enough that Sergei had no choice. He needed access to multiple units to assess the spread, to check for structural issues, to prevent mold. He knocked on Svetlana's door with a maintenance worker beside him. No answer. He knocked again, harder this time, called her name, told her it was an emergency. Building code. He had to come in. Still nothing. He pulled out his master key. The door opened 6 inches before catching on a chain lock. Through the gap, the smell hit them immediately. Not faint, not subtle, not something you could explain away or ignore. Overwhelming. A wall of rot and decay so thick it felt physical, like walking into something solid. The maintenance worker, a young man named Dmitri, gagged immediately and stepped back into the hallway. He covered his mouth with his sleeve. Sergei forced himself to stay. He called through the opening, demanded she unlock the door, told her he had no choice. The water was spreading. He needed to inspect. For a long moment there was silence. Then Svetlana appeared in the crack of the doorway. She looked worse than anyone had ever seen her. Her skin was gray, her eyes sunken deep into her skull, her lips cracked and pale. She was wearing the same clothes she'd been seen in weeks ago, stained, wrinkled, hanging off her emaciated frame. She looked like someone who hadn't eaten in days, maybe longer. "You can't come in," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, raw. Sergei told her she didn't have a choice, told her about the water, about the damage, about the regulations. Svetlana's face twisted, not anger, something closer to panic. "He's sleeping," she said. "You'll wake him." Sergei and Dmitri exchanged a glance. Dmitri looked like he wanted to run. "Your son?" Sergei asked carefully. Svetlana nodded. Her eyes were wide, desperate. "Then we'll be quiet," Sergei said. His voice was steady, but his heart was pounding. "But I need to come in. I need to check for water damage." Svetlana stared at him for a long time. Her breathing was shallow, rapid. Then slowly she closed the door. They heard the chain slide free. When the door opened again, Svetlana stepped aside. The apartment was dark, all the curtains drawn tight. No lights on except for a faint glow coming from somewhere deeper inside. The air was thick, humid, poisonous. Dmitri refused to enter. He stayed in the hallway, breathing hard, his face pale. Sergei covered his nose and mouth with his sleeve and forced himself forward. The living room was cluttered but not filthy. Dishes stacked in the sink, old newspapers on the table, clothes draped over furniture. A small television glowing silently in the corner, showing some daytime program with the sound off. But the smell wasn't coming from the living room. It was coming from the bedroom. Sergei moved toward the door at the end of the narrow hall. His legs felt heavy. Every instinct told him to turn around, to leave, to call someone else. But he kept moving. Svetlana followed behind him. She was whispering something under her breath. The same words over and over. He couldn't make them out. He reached the bedroom door. It was closed. He put his hand on the handle, paused, looked back at Svetlana. She was staring at the door. Her expression was soft now, almost peaceful. "He's just sleeping," she said quietly. "Please don't be loud." Sergei pushed the door open and stopped. The room was dim. A single lamp with a torn shade cast weak yellow light across the space. The walls were covered in children's drawings, crayon sketches taped unevenly across the peeling paint. Animals, houses, trees, stick figure families holding hands. Some of the drawings were old, faded, curling at the edges. Others looked recent, the colors still bright. In the center of the room was a small bed, a child's bed, The frame was wooden. Simple. The sheets were pulled up neatly. And on the bed, tucked under a blanket patterned with faded cartoon animals, was Daniil. He was still. Completely still. Sergei took one step closer. Then another. His hand was shaking. The boy's skin was dark, leathery, sunken tight against the bones. His lips had pulled back slightly from his teeth. His eyes were closed, but the lids had receded, giving the impression of something almost awake, almost watching. There were small objects arranged around him on the bed. A stuffed bear, a toy car, a book with a torn cover. His hair had fallen away in patches, revealing mottled scalp beneath. He had been dead for years. Sergei backed out of the room. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His hands were shaking violently now. Svetlana stood in the doorway. She was calm now. She looked past Sergei at the bed, at her son, and her expression was tender, loving. "He's sleeping," she said again, softer this time, almost a lullaby. "He just needs to rest." Sergei didn't respond. He turned and walked quickly toward the front door, pulled his phone from his pocket with trembling hands. Svetlana didn't try to stop him, didn't call after him, didn't panic. She just turned back toward the bedroom, walked slowly to the bed, sat down carefully on the edge of the mattress, and smoothed the blanket over her son's body. She began humming. That same wordless melody Maxim had heard through the door, soft and tuneless and endless. Sergei was already in the hallway, already calling the police. But inside the apartment, Svetlana sat with Daniil, just like she had every day for 5 years. And in her mind, he was listening. In her mind, he was still alive. The police arrived 20 minutes later. 2 officers first, then a third, then a fourth. Word spread quickly through the station. Within an hour, there were 6 officers on scene. A medical examiner, a photographer, a senior detective. They entered carefully, slowly, like they were walking into something fragile that might collapse. Sergei waited in the hallway. His face was white, his hands still shaking. Dmitri had gone home. He'd vomited twice in the stairwell and couldn't stop crying. Svetlana was let out without resistance. She didn't cry, didn't shout, didn't struggle. She moved like someone in a trance, her eyes unfocused, her lips still moving in that same silent whisper. One officer tried to ask her a question. She didn't respond, didn't even look at him. As they guided her down the stairs, neighbors gathered in the hallway. Some covered their mouths. Others just stared. One woman, Galina, started crying, though she couldn't say exactly why. Svetlana looked at none of them. She walked past as if they weren't there, as if nothing was real except whatever was happening inside her own mind. They put her in the police car. She sat in the back seat, staring straight ahead, silent. Inside the apartment, the medical examiner worked quickly. His name was Dr. Volkov. He'd been doing this for 23 years. He'd seen bodies in every state of decay imaginable. But this was different. The body was in advanced stages of decomposition, mummified almost. The dry air, the closed windows, the cold winters, it had all slowed the process, preserved him in a grotesque halfway state. Daniil had been dead for approximately 5 years. Dr. Volkov took samples, photographs, notes. He worked methodically, but his hands were unsteady. This wasn't just a body. This was a child who had been dressed, arranged, cared for. Someone had been brushing his hair, or trying to. Someone had been changing his clothes. Someone had been tucking him in every night. The cause of death was determined later through autopsy. Acute pneumonia, compounded by severe malnutrition and untreated bacterial infection. His lungs had been full of fluid. His body already weakened by months of illness and starvation. He had likely been sick for weeks before he died, struggling to breathe, in pain, and Svetlana had done nothing. No doctor, no hospital, no call for help. She had simply let him slip away. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what came after. Investigators found journals in the apartment, dozens of them, stacked in the closet, tucked under the bed, hidden in drawers, all filled with Svetlana's handwriting, page after page of one-sided conversations. The detective in charge, a woman named Lieutenant Sokolova, read through them in silence. Her face grew paler with each page. The first entries were dated 5 years ago, just after Daniil died. Daniil is resting today. He needs his strength. I made soup. He didn't eat much, but that's okay. He'll eat when he's ready. He looks so peaceful when he sleeps. The entries continued. Day after day, month after month, year after year. Daniil woke up today feeling better. He smiled at me. We read together this afternoon. He likes the book about the animals. I read it to him twice. He asked for his bear. I gave it to him. He held it close. He's cold today. I brought extra blankets. The handwriting remained steady. Careful, as if she were writing in a diary meant to be read by someone else. As if she truly believed what she was writing. Lieutenant Sokolova flipped forward. The entries from the most recent months. Daniil is quiet today. But that's okay. He doesn't need to talk. I know what he needs. I drew him a picture. He loved it. I taped it on the wall with the others. He's tired. So tired. But I'm here. I'll always be here. The final entry was dated 2 days before the police arrived. I won't let them take you away. I promise. No matter what happens, we'll stay together. Lieutenant Sokolova closed the journal, set it down carefully on the table. In the kitchen, they found expired children's medicine, bottles of cough syrup from years ago, unopened boxes of crackers shaped like animals, a drawer full of small clothes, neatly folded, tags still attached. Never worn. She had been buying things for him. On the windowsill, there were drawings. New ones, done recently. Crude, childish sketches of houses and trees and suns, stick figures holding hands. Svetlana had drawn them herself. She had been making artwork for her dead son, adding it to the walls of his room, creating the illusion that he was still creating, still growing, still alive. In the bathroom, they found a hairbrush, strands of hair caught in the bristles. Dark hair, a child's hair. She had been brushing his hair even as it fell out in clumps. The refrigerator contained food, milk, cheese, bread, but also children's yogurt, juice boxes, food that no adult would eat, food that had been sitting there untouched for months. One officer found a calendar on the wall in the kitchen. It was 5 years old. The pages had never been turned past February. The day Daniil died was marked with a small heart drawn in red pen. Every day after that was blank. When the investigators finished documenting the scene, they removed the body. Dr. Volkov wrapped Daniil carefully in a white sheet, though there was little left to preserve. His small form barely made an impression under the fabric. They carried him out in the early evening. The hallway was empty now. The neighbors had retreated into their apartments, but Lieutenant Sokolova knew they were watching through their peepholes, through the cracks in their doors. She wondered how many of them had known, how many had suspected, how many had simply chosen not to see. Svetlana was taken to the station for questioning. She sat in the interrogation room for 3 hours before anyone spoke to her. She didn't ask for water, didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't ask for anything. She just sat, hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. When Lieutenant Sokolova finally entered, she sat across from Svetlana and studied her carefully. The woman looked skeletal, hollowed out, like something that had been emptied and left behind. "Svetlana," she said gently, "I need to ask you some questions." Svetlana blinked, focused on her slowly. "Okay," she said. Her voice was barely audible. Lieutenant Sokolova started with simple questions. Name, age, address. Svetlana answered each one clearly, calmly. Then came the harder questions. When did Daniil die? Svetlana paused, her brow furrowed. "He didn't die," she said. Lieutenant Sokolova kept her voice even. "Svetlana, we found him. In your apartment. He's been dead for several years." Svetlana shook her head slowly. "No, he's resting. He's just very tired." "Did he get sick?" A long pause. "Yes." "Did you take him to a doctor?" Another pause. Longer this time. "No." "Why not?" Svetlana looked down at her hands. Her fingers twisted together. "I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of what?" "That they would take him away from me." Lieutenant Sokolova leaned forward slightly. "Take him away how?" "The hospital," Svetlana said. Her voice was small, childlike. If they saw how sick he was, they'd keep him there. And I'd be alone. So you kept him home? Yes. Even when he got worse? Yes. Even when he died? Svetlana's face crumpled. But no tears came. He didn't die, she said again. He's just sleeping. He needs to rest. He'll wake up when he's ready. Lieutenant Sokolova sat back. She'd interviewed hundreds of suspects. Killers. Abusers. People who lied as easily as breathing. This was different. Svetlana wasn't lying. She truly believed it. A psychologist was brought in. Dr. Petrov. He'd worked with the police department for years. He sat with Svetlana for 2 hours, asked her questions, listened to her answers. When he emerged, his face was grim. She's experiencing severe dissociative psychosis, he said, likely triggered by the trauma of her son's death. She's constructed an alternate reality in which he's still alive, and she's been living inside that reality for 5 years. Can she tell the difference? Lieutenant Sokolova asked. Between what's real and what's not, Doctor. Petrov shook his head. No. To her, it's all real. The journals, the drawings, the conversations. She genuinely believes her son is alive and well. Will she ever accept the truth? I don't know. Her mind has built this delusion as a defense mechanism. Removing it might cause a complete psychological collapse. Lieutenant Sokolova looked through the window into the interrogation room. Svetlana sat motionless, staring at the wall. What happens to someone like that? She asked quietly. Doctor. Petrov didn't answer right away. Prison, he said finally. Psychiatric prison. For a very long time. The neighbors were interviewed one by one over the following days. Most said the same things. They had noticed the smell, the strange behavior, the absence of the child, but no one had called anyone. One woman, Oksana, the nurse who had heard Svetlana talking to herself, broke down during her statement. I thought about calling someone, she said, tears streaming down her face. I really did. I thought something was wrong. But I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't want to be wrong. I thought maybe I was imagining things. She covered her face with her hands. I could have saved him. Couldn't I? If I'd just called someone. The officer taking her statement didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Victor, the older man who had seen Svetlana carrying the blanket, sat in silence for most of his interview. When asked if he'd suspected anything, he stared at his hands. I knew, he said finally. I didn't know what, but I knew something was wrong. Why didn't you report it? Victor looked up. His eyes were red. Because I didn't want to know, he said. I didn't want it to be real. So I told myself it wasn't. The building manager, Sergei, gave his statement in a monotone. He admitted he had suspected something was wrong, that he should have insisted on entering the apartment months ago. Years ago, I thought maybe the kid had just moved away, he said. I thought maybe she'd sent him to live with relatives, or maybe he died and she'd reported it and I just didn't know. He paused. I didn't want to deal with it, he said. So I didn't. The grocery store where Svetlana worked released a brief statement. They expressed shock and sympathy, said she had always been a reliable employee, said they had no idea anything was wrong. Her co-workers were interviewed as well. Most remembered her as quiet, withdrawn, but not dangerous. Irina, the young woman who had asked if Svetlana was okay, cried throughout her entire interview. She said she was fine, Irina kept repeating. She said she was just tired. I believed her. I should have pushed. I should have asked more questions, but no one had. No one had pushed. No one had insisted. Everyone had simply accepted the easy answer, the comfortable lie. And Daniil had paid the price. Daniil's body was taken to the morgue, catalogued, photographed, examined, then released for burial. There was no service, no mourners, no family came forward. He was buried in an unmarked grave in a cemetery on the outskirts of the city, a small coffin lowered into frozen ground. The workers filled the hole quickly and moved on to the next job. Svetlana was never told where he was buried. She never asked. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Svetlana sat in the courtroom every day, silent and still. She wore the same gray sweater they had given her in custody. Her hair was tied back. her hands folded in her lap. She looked small in the defendant's chair, diminished, almost childlike. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the back rows. Sketch artists worked quietly in the corners. Every day, people lined up outside hoping for a seat, hoping to see the woman who had lived with her dead son for 5 years, hoping to understand something that couldn't be understood. The prosecution presented the evidence methodically, carefully. The journals were entered as exhibits. Passages were read aloud. The courtroom fell silent as the prosecutor's voice filled the space. Daniil woke up today feeling better. He smiled at me. We read together this afternoon. He likes the book about the animals. He asked for soup. I made his favorite. Each entry was dated. Each one a window into a delusion that had lasted years. The photographs were shown. The bedroom. The drawings on the walls. The small body on the bed. The courtroom gasped. Some people looked away. Others stared, unable to process what they were seeing. Svetlana watched the screen without expression, as if she were looking at something that had nothing to do with her. The medical examiner testified, explained the cause of death, described the state of the body, spoke in clinical terms about decomposition and mummification and the conditions that had preserved the remains. He avoided looking at Svetlana while he spoke. Neighbors testified, their voices shaking, their guilt written across their faces. They described the smell, the conversations, the warnings they had ignored. Galina cried on the stand, said she would never forgive herself, said she should have done something, anything. Oksana couldn't finish her testimony. She broke down halfway through and had to be escorted from the courtroom. Victor testified without emotion, answered every question directly, but when asked if he had any regrets, his voice cracked. I regret everything, he said. Every day I did nothing. The building manager, Sergei, testified about the complaints, the smell, the stain on the ceiling. He admitted he should have forced entry earlier, should have called the police, should have trusted his instincts. I failed that child, he said quietly. I failed him completely. The prosecution called it criminal neglect. Criminal negligence resulting in death. They argued that Svetlana had allowed her son to die through willful inaction, that she had known he was sick, known he needed medical care, and chosen to do nothing. They argued that she had then desecrated his body by refusing to report his death, by keeping him in her apartment, by treating his corpse as if it were still a living child. This woman, the prosecutor said, pointing at Svetlana, chose her own comfort over her son's life. She chose denial over action, and when he died as a result of her neglect, she refused to accept responsibility. She created a fantasy world where he was still alive so she wouldn't have to face what she had done. He paused, let the words hang in the air. She is guilty, and she must be held accountable. The defense argued mental incapacity. They brought in psychologists who testified that Svetlana had experienced a complete psychological break, that she had not been in control of her actions, that she genuinely believed her son was still alive. Dr. Petrov took the stand, explained dissociative disorders, described the mechanisms of denial and delusion, spoke about the mind's capacity to protect itself from unbearable trauma by constructing alternate realities. Svetlana Mikhailovna did not make a conscious choice to harm her son, he said. She was suffering from a severe mental illness that prevented her from recognizing reality. In her mind, her son was alive. She was caring for him. She was being a good mother. The prosecutor challenged him, asked if Svetlana had been capable of going to work, of shopping for groceries, of interacting with neighbors. Yes, doctor, Petrov admitted. So she could function in the real world, to an extent, but chose not to seek help for her dying son, doctor. Petrov hesitated. Her illness prevented her from recognizing that he was dying. Or she simply didn't want to face the consequences of getting him medical care. The questions, the judgment, the possibility of losing custody. That's not what the evidence suggests, isn't it? The prosecutor held up one of the journals. She writes here, and I quote, "I was afraid they would take him away from me." That's not delusion. That's a conscious fear, a rational thought, doctor. Petrov said nothing. The defense also called witnesses who spoke about Svetlana's life before Danil's death. Her co-workers described her as kind, gentle, devoted to her son. One teacher from Danil's school testified that Svetlana had always seemed loving, if perhaps overprotective. She held his hand very tightly, the teacher said, but I thought she was just nervous. A single mother trying her best. The teacher's voice broke. I should have seen it. Should have recognized the signs, but no one had seen it. That was the pattern that emerged throughout the trial. No one had seen it because no one had wanted to look too closely. One psychologist described it as collective willful blindness, a community choosing comfort over confrontation. We tell ourselves we would intervene, she said, that if we saw something wrong, we would act. But the reality is that most people will find reasons not to. It's uncomfortable. It's intrusive. It might be nothing. And so we do nothing. She looked at the courtroom. Everyone in this building failed Danil. Not just his mother. Everyone. When Svetlana was finally asked to speak, the courtroom fell completely silent. She stood slowly. Her lawyer tried to guide her, but she shook her head gently, stood on her own, looked at the judge, then at the courtroom. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but clear. I loved him, she said. I only wanted to keep him safe. Someone in the gallery sobbed. I know you think I hurt him, but I didn't. I would never hurt him. He was everything to me. She paused. Her hands trembled. He got sick, and I was afraid. I was afraid of the doctors, of the hospitals, of them taking him away. I thought if I just kept him home, kept him warm, kept him close, he would get better. Her voice cracked. But he didn't get better. He got worse. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to help him. And then one morning, he wasn't breathing anymore. Tears ran down her face. The first tears anyone had seen. I tried to wake him. I tried for hours, but he wouldn't wake up, and I couldn't accept it. I couldn't accept that he was gone. She looked down at her hands, so I told myself he was just sleeping, just resting, and if I took care of him, if I stayed with him, if I never left him alone, then he would be okay. He would still be mine. She looked up again, met the judge's eyes. I know what you found. I know what you think, but to me, he was never dead. He was always there, always with me. I could hear him, feel him. He was still my son. She wiped her eyes. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't save him. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger. I'm sorry I couldn't let him go. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but I loved him. I need you to know that. Everything I did because I loved him. She sat back down. The courtroom was silent. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They found her guilty of criminal negligence resulting in death, guilty of failure to report a death, guilty of improper disposal of human remains. But they also recommended psychiatric treatment. The judge, a woman in her 60s who had presided over countless cases, took a long time before delivering the sentence. She removed her glasses, rubbed her eyes, looked at Svetlana. This court acknowledges that you were suffering from severe mental illness, she said. The evidence supports that. Your delusion was real to you, and in your mind, you were caring for your son. She paused. But your mental illness does not absolve you of responsibility. Your son needed medical care. He was dying, and whether through delusion or denial or fear, you did not get him that care, and as a result, he died. The judge put her glasses back on. Furthermore, for 5 years after his death, you kept his body in your home. You prevented him from receiving a proper burial. You created a situation that was not only illegal but deeply disturbing. She looked directly at Svetlana. This court sentences you to 12 years in a psychiatric correctional facility. You will receive ongoing mental health treatment, and you will not be eligible for parole until you have been deemed capable of understanding the reality of what occurred. Svetlana showed no reaction. She simply nodded. As she was led out of the courtroom, a journalist called out to her. Do you regret what you did? Svetlana stopped, turned slightly. I kept him with me, she said. Her voice was calm, almost peaceful. He wasn't alone. I made sure he wasn't alone. And then she was gone. The case made national news. Psychologists debated it on television. Journalists wrote think pieces about mental illness and social responsibility and the failure of community. But within a few months, the story faded. Other tragedies took its place. Other horrors filled the headlines. The apartment was cleared out 6 weeks after Svetlana's conviction. Everything inside was removed and destroyed. The walls were scrubbed, the floors replaced. The bedroom where Daniil had lain for 5 years was gutted entirely. A new tenant moved in by late summer, a young couple expecting their first child. They were told there had been a previous occupant, but not the details. They never asked. The building manager never mentioned it. Neither did the neighbors. Within a year, most of the people who had lived in the building during those 5 years had moved away. Some cited other reasons: job transfers, family obligations, better opportunities. But they all left, and those who remained never spoke about what had happened. It became one of those things everyone knew, but no one acknowledged. A shadow in the building's history, a stain that couldn't quite be scrubbed away. Svetlana remains in the psychiatric facility. According to her case file, she is a model patient. Calm, compliant. She takes her medication without resistance. She attends therapy sessions. She follows all the rules, but she rarely speaks. When she does, she talks about Daniil. She talks about him in the present tense. She says he's doing well, that he's growing, that he misses her, but he understands why she can't be with him right now. She says he's waiting for her. Her doctors have noted that she still does not accept that he is dead, that her delusion remains intact despite years of treatment, despite medication, despite every attempt to bring her back to reality. One psychiatrist wrote in her file, "Patient has constructed a psychological fortress around the memory of her son. Any attempt to breach that fortress results in immediate withdrawal. It is my opinion that she will never fully accept his death. To do so would require her to confront not only her grief, but her guilt. And I do not believe she is capable of surviving that confrontation." Another wrote, "Patient appears content in her delusion. She is not distressed, not agitated. She has found a way to live with what she did by convincing herself she didn't do it. In a way, her mind has protected her from the full weight of her actions. Whether this is mercy or curse, I cannot say. She receives no visitors. No family has come forward. Her co-workers from the grocery store tried once, but she refused to see them. She spends most of her time in her room. She draws childish pictures of houses and trees and animals. The staff lets her tape them to her walls. It makes her happy. At night, the staff sometimes hear her talking. Soft murmurs through the door. One-sided conversations that go on for hours. She's reading bedtime stories, singing lullabies, saying goodnight to a child who has been dead for over a decade. Daniil's grave remains unmarked. The cemetery keeps records, but there is no headstone, no flowers, no indication that a child is buried there. Just a plot of grass among thousands of others. No one visits. No one remembers, except Svetlana. And in her mind, he isn't there anyway. In her mind, he's still in that small bedroom, still tucked under that blanket with the faded cartoon animals, still waiting for her to come home, still alive, still hers, forever. The question that haunted the case, that journalists and psychologists and everyone who followed the trial kept asking, was this: how could a mother do that? How could love become something so twisted, so destructive? But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the real question is, how could everyone else do nothing? How could an entire building full of people smell decay for months and not demand answers? How could neighbors hear one-sided conversations and not call for help? How could a building manager ignore a stain spreading across a ceiling because it was easier than confronting what might be causing it? How could teachers and social workers and co-workers all accept vague explanations and never push for more? The answer is uncomfortable, because it means acknowledging that we are all capable of looking away, of choosing comfort over confrontation, of telling ourselves it's not our problem, not our responsibility, of letting a child die in silence because we didn't want to deal with the noise of speaking up. Svetlana Mikhailovna was guilty. The courts determined that. The evidence supported it. But she wasn't the only one. Everyone who walked past that door and smelled death and did nothing was guilty. Everyone who heard something wrong and chose to ignore it was guilty. Everyone who accepted easy lies because the truth was too difficult was guilty. Daniil died alone, in pain, neglected by the one person who should have protected him. But after he died, he was neglected by an entire community. And that is the real horror of this story. Not that one woman's mind broke under the weight of her grief and guilt, but that dozens of people had the power to intervene, to save a child, to demand answers, and chose not to, because it was easier, because it wasn't their problem, because they didn't want to know. Svetlana sits in her cell tonight, drawing pictures, talking to the empty air, living in a world where her son is still alive. And somewhere in an unmarked grave, Daniil lies in the darkness, alone, silent, forgotten by everyone except the woman who killed him by loving him too much and too poorly. There are things that happen behind closed doors that the human mind refuses to accept as possible. But they happen anyway. Every day, in every city, behind doors that neighbors walk past without stopping, without knocking, without asking questions. Because sometimes the most horrifying thing isn't what happens in the darkness. It's what we allow to happen by choosing not to look.